Happy New Year, friends. We are live with another episode of What's New in Prisma, where we are talking about the news in the Prisma ecosystem and in the Prisma community. And today is the first episode that we're doing in 2021 after an extensive holiday special that we did just before everybody went down into the holidays. And today I'm here with my colleague Ryan, as usual. Hey, Ryan.
Hello.
And then we also have a guest. We have Tim here today. Tim, do you quickly want to introduce yourself and maybe tell us already why you are joining the stream today, what people can expect from you?
Yeah, so I'm Tim. I'm a software engineer at Prisma, doing mostly TypeScript stuff. And I will today mostly talk about React server components and the very experimental early integration with Prisma.
Yeah. Exactly. Because React server components will be the big topic of today's stream. In fact, we have a fairly short agenda today. So we are going to talk about this week's release, where the biggest feature is the new groupBy query that you can now send to the database with Prisma Client. Then we'll discuss React server components in detail with Tim. And in the end, and that's your opportunity today, everybody who's watching, to ask the questions that you always wanted to ask about Prisma, because since the agenda is a little bit shorter, we'll try to do a little bit of a Q&A in the end and pick up a couple of questions from the chat. So if you're around and whatever comes to mind that you want to know, now is the time for you to drop these kinds of questions in the chat so that we can pick them up in the end. Maybe to warm up a little bit, it's just the first week after the holidays, basically. So I think everybody's still kind of getting accommodated in 2021. Like, what were the first things that were on your like on your radar? What have you been working on, Ryan, in this first week of 2021?
Yeah, I've been digging into the latest features of 2.14, groupBy being the big one, which I'll demo in just a little bit. That's been very interesting to explore. What else have I been up to? Doing some organization for upcoming stuff, digging into some content that I'll be releasing soon, in particular with regards to Angular and Nest. So if there's any fans of Angular and Nest around, there's some content coming that has to do with Prisma and those technologies.
Very nice.
That's been what's on my plate. How about you?
Yeah, I feel that the first couple of weeks in a new year and in a new quarter are typically a lot of planning, right? So at the moment, I think we're all just kind of settling a little bit and thinking about what's ahead in the next couple of weeks and months. The most concrete things that I have been working on was the Apollo live stream that I've been joining yesterday, actually. So people can watch that on the Apollo GraphQL Twitch channel. It was a pretty extensive one. It went also about 2 hours in the end. I was on the stream with Kurt Campbell, so the DevRel manager of Apollo, and we took the project from the Apollo GraphQL tutorial from their website, and we migrated that from SQLize to Prisma. And it was a very, very nice stream. I had a lot of fun. We went in a lot of depth also in terms of explaining how Prisma works, covered a lot of ground with respect to certain features. So I think especially for Prisma newcomers, this will also be an interesting resource to just check out and see what's possible with Prisma when they are combining that with GraphQL.
Nice. That's cool. I am excited to check that out. I wasn't able to check it out live, but I'm sure I can catch the recording.
Yeah. Cool. Why don't we go ahead and talk about this week's release already, 2.14. We released it on Tuesday. Ryan, do you want to walk us through the new stuff that has been released on Tuesday?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to pop my screen up there, I can show the release notes and go through what is new. So 2.14 landed 2 days ago, and the biggest thing by far in this release is what seems to be kind of a long-awaited feature, which is the groupBy feature. So what you get now at Prisma 2.14 is this new method called groupBy, and you can use it to do grouping and aggregation, and within that, filtering and stuff like that. I'll give you a quick look at how it works. You'd call the groupBy method, pass your object for configuration in here, and you can do things like this. You can select a field to group by. You can then do some math here. You can set a minimum, you can do a sum, an average. You can take values from your data and start to aggregate them together like that. So the example here, the resulting example, is we're grouping by location, and you get a returned result for every unique instance of location in this case, right? So Los Angeles, London, Tokyo, possibly many different results in the database that have these locations. But what we're doing is we're just taking the unique ones, and then we're putting together the kind of the minimum for this field called rate. And so we'll dig a bit more into how this works when I show a demo in just a little bit. Along those lines, there's other kind of options you get with groupby. One of them is this key called halving, which allows you to take results that have been sort of calculated within the grouping and aggregation stage, and then be able to filter kind of further. I'll show that a little bit in more depth in just a sec too. So really long requested feature, uses the native stuff under the hood when you're making your queries, like sum and groupby and stuff like this. And I think this really rounds out very nicely the feature set of query capability within the Prisma client. So very nice new feature. A lot of people excited about that, and you can check out the particulars here in the release notes, and of course in the documentation, which is here. We've got a very nice set of docs showing groupby and how it works in more detail. So groupby, very excited for that. A couple other things that are maybe big deals for some people, maybe not though. One is this support for Linux, ARM64. So I'm not a Linux user. I've used Linux in the past, but I'm not like a straight up Linux user. So I don't think this affects me too much. But for those out there who are using Linux and need support for ARM64, you've got it now. There is a way to opt into it with binary targets pointing to this particular key configuration here, and more about that in the documentation that's linked within.
One quick note here: the AWS Graviton instances, all of them are now available with this. That's quite
all right.
nice. Yeah.
Cool. I wonder if there's anything extra about that in the docs. Do we know, Tim? I'm not sure.
It probably just explains the different kind of binary targets that are available. So like maybe we could quickly explain actually what these are used for, and why a number of people might actually not be even familiar with this binary targets key, because this is actually something optional that you don't always have to configure when you're using Prisma. Mm-hmm. The reason why it might be necessary is because the query engine that is running alongside your application instance needs to be compiled for a different or for a specific operating system. And by default, we are picking the operating system that you're currently running onto, so we were able to detect the proper default. But it might be that you're developing on a machine and you're deploying your code on a different machine. And when that's the case, then you need to specify the binary target of your deployment machine in order to have the query engine built in the right format. So that's why these binary targets are relevant in the first place. But because they're most of the time working out of the box, people might actually not be familiar with them, even though they're a pretty core feature or like a pretty core element to how Prisma works.
Yep. For sure. And there's a lot of different ones you can opt into here. So check out these docs. This is in the binary targets options section of the Prisma schema reference docs. So you can check out what's available there. Thank you for that, Niko. And yeah, that's an opt-in in the binary targets that you would set in your client. So this is now here in 2.14 fixes. One of them is, and I haven't run into this because I'm not a PostGIS user, but issues with migrate have been there with PostGIS. So Prisma Migrate now works alongside PostGIS with the PostGIS extension. That's new at 2.14. Some breaking changes for TypeScript users, and this is potentially a big one. I'm not sure. I ran into this issue as I was testing out groupBy. Actually, I had an older version of TypeScript installed globally, and was running into some issues with the new groupBy feature. Version 4.1 or above now required. So if you are on an older version of TypeScript, you may not be able to get access to these features, and you may have to step down your version. Hopefully, everyone can upgrade to 4.1 or above, but if you can't, there may be some blockers there. As we have said, we are kind of on the bleeding edge in some respects in how Prisma is kind of working under the hood with TypeScript. Lots of other fixes and improvements you can go through here in the release notes. I won't get into detail about these ones, but you can have a cruise through, and they're all linked. So check that out. Those are the big things, though, in 2.14, and of course, groupBy is the biggest. So with that, unless anyone's got any specific questions, I can go into a demo here of groupBy. What do you think, Niko? Should I hop over to the demo?
Yes, let's do it.
All right. So I have got a very simple schema here. I've got a Prisma project set up, and it's got this product schema, a few simple keys, name, price, category, and a rating. So really simple model here. What I've done here is I have opted into this preview feature of groupBy. So if you want to use the new groupBy method, this is what you'll have to do. You'll have to opt into it as a preview feature. And so then I have got just a simple call to find many. So let's do this, npm run dev, and we'll see the data that I've got in here. Got a number of records that are different products. I don't know. I was trying to think of what to put in here, and I looked at my iPhone and I was like, let's make a list of products. So I've got a whole range of different things. I've got electronics, I've got furniture and food, and so just things you might find at a store, I guess. The idea that I want to show now is we've got this like raw list of data. And if we wanted to try to aggregate it, like maybe we wanted to show, totals for some kind of dashboard or something, we can use the brand new groupBy. So what you might start by doing is say, I want to group by category. So that's the key within that I want to start to group things up by. And the nice thing about this is because we're totally typed here, we get access to the available fields that we might want to do our grouping by. So I can choose category, I'll hit save, and there we go. We've got our categories. And then we've got a number of, I guess, arithmetic operators, maybe you would call them. We've got things like average and count, min and max, and sum. So we can do sum on price, for example. And this gives us the summary of the price, I guess, the aggregate of all the prices that are found within each of these products. So like if we take a look at, some of these broken out, like food, I've got a price of 5 here. The burger is $12, but once you add these all together, you get a total of 27. So nice way to aggregate some some numbers in this case. So let's see, what else can we do? We can maybe specify a where clause. So we don't want to take absolutely everything. Let's say we want the case where we want the name to be restricted to certain values. We can do something like name not in, and then we can give it this array. Let's say we don't want the burger or the tofu in this case. We'll save that. And we still get a result of 3 things, the electronics, the food, and the furniture. But what you'll notice is that the price for food has changed. It's now down to $5 instead of 27 because we are not including those 2 items, the burger and the tofu. So you can restrict on, various keys that you've got within your data. And there's things like not in, you can do what in, you can do not. So different operators there to give yourself the best way to query down to what you want. And then what's really cool is we can have a way to restrict values or to get a subset of the values back based on stuff that has happened within like the filtering and the aggregation that's taken place throughout the grouping. And what I mean by that is we've got this thing called halving. And so essentially what we're saying here is we want to filter down to something where this group has a certain property, a certain construction. And so what we could do is we could say, let's get ourselves results that are having where, what is it, rating, an average, and we'll say the average is greater than or equal to maybe 7. And if we do that, now we've got down to 2 records because these ones, the total, the average rating of these groups, I'm just filtering down to ones that have a rating of 7 or above. So, that's going to give us a way to filter down even further. There's a bunch more stuff you can do within the whole group by, I guess, stage here. There's other operators that you've got. So it's very comprehensive, very robust. I want to show you what we get if we want to see the actual queries, the raw query that comes out. So if we save and do this again, probably a bit hard to read, but we've got things like where we are doing a sum, we're using the where clause, we are using the having clause, average, limiting, and of course grouping by. So this is giving us this whole kind of like construction of a way to filter and aggregate and group and all of that. And it's interesting, someone dropped a comment, I think maybe you, Niko, saw someone post in the community Slack that perhaps this is not the best name for this method. Maybe a better name is something like aggregate. And I thought that was interesting because this reminds me a lot. I've done a lot of work with MongoDB, and this reminds me a lot of like the aggregation pipeline that you get with MongoDB. So, in Mongo, you're going to, if you're using the aggregation pipeline, you're going to do like a limit and a sort and a where and all these things, right? And so I found that interesting. I almost felt like aggregate might be an interesting name for this method, but groupBy it is. groupBy stands, and it gives us a lot of power to, get the data we want in a much cleaner way. This is going to be a much nicer way to aggregate and get all your data in the state that you want it, much nicer than what you previously had to do. So that is groupBy. Any thoughts on that, Niko or Tim?
Very nice demo. Thank you so much, Ryan. And as usual, it's just a pleasure watching somebody work with Prisma in VS Code using all the auto completion. It's just so nice to see that like all the time. This kind of developer experience is absolutely amazing. We had a question in the chat already about groupBy, which I think we can already talk about right now. The other questions we'll save for the end. But Phil asked if there is any specific reason that the feature uses a list of strings, but the include field that you can also use to load relations uses objects with true, where you have to include the relation as an object. And it's true that the API design diverges from the way how we're using include. I'm actually not sure about the reasoning behind that, but maybe Tim can talk about this a little bit more. And
yes, I think I can. Yeah, I can tell you that because I designed this API. So it's quite simple. For include, we need to be able to recursively go over relations. So we have a tree structure or graph structure. And that is the nature of the problem we have. We want to be able to say, I want to go over the posts and I want to go for the comments. Having a nested array, you can just write that out for fun in an editor. It's not nice to read. It's nice for the first level. It's great. But as soon as you go deeper, that's not that nice anymore. For groupBy, however, we will never have groupBy relations. It's always by scalar fields. So in that case, we said there is no nested API, and it's much easier to have just the array because that's all there will be. That's the main reason. So we kept it simple because it was possible, but for include and select, it's not really possible. You could do it, but as soon as you have deep nesting, you have the mismatch between the actual nature of the problem and how you write your API. I always, it's like a 2D to 3D mismatch, or 1D to 2D. I always like the example when you have an oven and you have the 4 plates, that's 2D. And then in front of the oven, you have all of the knobs in 1D. That's a mismatch. So every single time I use a new oven, I don't know what is the match, and they have all the time a different match. If you would have them also 2D, that would be perfect, and I know what is being meant. So yeah, we try to keep that match, basically.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. Great to have the
explanation.
architect here to answer that question.
Yeah.
I was wondering too, but Tim, maybe you could speak a bit further to the something you mentioned, which is we'll never have groupBy available for relations, only scalars. And maybe talk a little bit about that. I mean, of course, there are technical reasons for that. I was wondering a bit about that when I first set out with some demos here. I was, trying to see if it would make sense to do grouping across a relation or something like that. But give us a little bit more on why that's not the case.
I think it's mostly about the capabilities of the databases that we are supporting. I just don't think that all the databases would support this. Yeah, and they are like groupBy is a very interconnected and constrained API that many might not know. And there are a couple of little features here that are also interesting to demo. For example, everything you use in having needs to appear in by, unless it's an aggregation. And we were able to express this on a type system level. So let's say if you would change your rating in your having to just be like 7 or something like that directly instead of average, suddenly you get a type error. And if you now hover in line 8, the products, the variable where you assign the variable, if you hover that a bit longer, and you will see this. So what we're doing here, we say field rating used in having needs to be provided in by. And this is a dynamic type system error message that we are generating based on the type field having field rating. So if we would now in having have a different field that we are using that is not in by, the error message would change. So we made sure that on the type system level, that's also why we need TypeScript 4.1, because we are really writing on the edge. That's why 4.1 is needed, because we do some crazy stuff. Also, if you, for example, now introduce a take 1 parameter, or like skip 0, for example, again, we will get a type error. And this time it says if you provide skip, you also need to provide order by. Why is that? Because skip and take are pagination features, and in order to have them stable, we need an order. And that's why order by is then required. So now if you add an order by, that works.
Give me what's
provide an array, and then in the array there is an object, and that object has a property that is a field name, for example, rating, and then descending. D is a string, DESC, lowercase, yeah, and then the comma, yeah, and now it works. So we are riding on the edge here for TypeScript. That's why it's not possible in 4.1, and TypeScript definitions are escalated a bit on this. We hope that TypeScript will continue supporting this, because, and what you hit, I think, Ryan, was even that it said whatever, there's like a recursive type definition. So without 4.1, it's not even possible. Also, these type system error messages, we're using template string literals, which just landed in 4.1.
Right.
To make the API as nice as possible. And yeah, we try to like make everything as nice as possible. If you, for example, if the by is empty, if you just make the by empty
array, or just
the whole an empty array. Then we also have a special error message on the type system for that. It will say by must not be empty. So because normally you can either say in TypeScript it's required or not. It is required, but it also must not be empty. So these are like the little tweaks we put in there to make sure that you get great support from TypeScript.
Very cool.
Yep.
Awesome. I love the in-depth explanation. Thank you. Very cool.
right.
Well, I'm going to
Yeah.
stop sharing, and maybe we can move on to the other items we have got. Niko, if you want to take it from here.
Yeah, let's talk about React Server components next. And the main reason why we actually brought Tim on here today, because Tim really is a TypeScript veteran, I think. Tim, since when have you been writing TypeScript code?
2015, I think. Yeah.
Wow.
2015.
Very early.
And you were also, I think, probably one of the very early adopters of React back in the day, like when it came out.
Yeah, I think 2014 I gave the first talk about it in Karlsruhe JS, and then back then we were mostly talking about Flux or Redux. Redux was not out then, but the Flux architecture. I remember after my talk we had like 45 minutes questions. Because you come there and you're just telling them everything you do MVC is wrong, and this is now the way to go. And then people had questions. Yeah, and since then I'm using React as well.
Yeah, and a lot has happened in the React ecosystem, and especially this new latest development. A couple of days before the holidays, the React team announced a new experimental feature called React Server Components. Tim, maybe you can give a 1 to 2 minute quick overview of what React Server Components are, and then we'll dive a little bit more into the details about them.
Yeah. So first of all, let me say what they are not. All the people who did not watch the video, of course, the first thing they said, it's like PHP, basically. No, it's not the case. So server component sounds like, okay, we're now just rendering React on the server. And that's true. But why it's not PHP is that it's much more powerful. And the thing is that with PHP, you render everything on the server or not. Here you can say, in my React tree, dependency tree of components, a part of that can be rendered in the client and another part can be in the server. And a server component can be a child component of a client component and the other way around. And React then is connected to your backend, and it will tell the backend, hey, I need to render this component with these props, give that to me. And then they have a streaming protocol implemented, and the server will now stream back the result. What does it mean to stream? So they are not doing WebSockets, but just a long-living HTTP connection. And they send, so if the component on the server side already renders back a loading state, for example, they already stream that to the client can show it. And then in the meantime, let's say you need to do some API call or database call, they then will fetch that stuff and then they will render the whole component. So this is really genius. It's this new streaming protocol that they spec'd out and implemented. Yeah. And so what is so interesting about this now in this React Server component, I can fully access everything that Node.js gives me. So basically all the libraries that are available, like the FS library or PG, so the React team already wrapped a few libraries, PG and FS. The reason they wrapped that, I can also get into that later, because the wrapping is actually doesn't do a lot. So they had this demo. It was also a great video. I really can recommend watching it. Dan Abramov, for example, in there, and they just showed that with PG. And of course, it's clear what we have to do now, which is what Niko proposed in his tweet, where he was like, no, we don't want to do PG. It's much better to do Prisma in a React Server component, because the React engineers, the Facebook engineers, they obviously have to tell people, no, this is unsafe. You cannot just concatenate some SQL in your components. This is really unsafe. You should have something that has more control, maybe over access and so on. And this is perfect opportunity for Prisma.
Right, and like we'll talk about that exact point of how you can use Prisma in server components. And in fact, we prepared a demo that people already can check out. So there is a repo that we're going to show in just a bit. And I just wanted to add to the point that you said, Tim, about not wanting to use SQL in your React component because it's unsafe. So of course, that's one aspect of it. But I think the other aspect, and that's especially relevant for front-end developers, is that SQL is fairly far away from their kind of mental model of working with data. So like as a front-end developer, I think you're very used to either making calls to a REST API or to a GraphQL API that just returns objects to you that you can immediately work with. So you're kind of used to that object-oriented model of data that you're working with. And working with relational databases and with plain SQL, on the other hand, uses a very different kind of data model, right? There, the data is structured in tables, and relations are represented with foreign keys, and the data is normalized, it's flat. So that translation is something that I think no developer really enjoys doing. And that's where these kinds of tools and libraries, such as Prisma, are coming into play to help developers to do that mapping in a more efficient and also in a more just like pleasant way. So let's maybe dive into the demo. Tim, do you want to share your screen and maybe like walk us through the README of the repo first, and then show the demo?
Yes, and I just have to do a shout out here. We have apparently Dan Abramov in the chat. Seems like he's watching, so that's exciting.
All right, greetings to Dan.
So Dan Abramov, I hope we're not completely destroying your demo now, ripping it apart. But yeah, so how can I actually render this? How was the shortcut?
In the top right, I think you have this like this icon with a
open preview. There we go.
Oh, yeah.
First of all, thanks, Niko, for tuning this demo. So I think it was a few days after Christmas that I looked into this, watched the video, and then decided, okay,
maybe
we should
increase the font a little bit. Sorry, Tim.
Yeah,
like maybe
of course.
The font just a little bit.
Is that better?
That's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I watched the video and looked into the code of React PG, and decided we should do the same for Prisma. And what we did here, we forked the official demo and basically replaced Postgres native client. Also, just to be able to run the demo easier, we replaced Postgres with SQLite, but it doesn't really matter. You still, like, if you don't want to use SQLite, that's the beauty with Prisma. You can just go in here and you can just say PostgreSQL and you're done. But anyway, we just have a SQLite for demo purposes.
Yeah, and we even have instructions in the README as well if you want to switch the database provider.
Perfect.
You have the instructions there, so you can set it up with Postgres, with MySQL, and SQL Server if you actually want to try this out against a real database.
Yeah. Yeah, perfect. And you even, nice, Niko, you really tuned this example. Yeah, and so, for example, here in the demo, they have been using, oops, I clicked on this. They have been using this like syntax, where the title is insensitive, case insensitive, like that one, so that you can use as a search. And translated to Prisma, this is just Prisma node find many, where the title contains. So it's a bit more natural to write this. This is also type safe. This particular example is not written with TypeScript, so not really type safe, but we at least have autocompletion, also thanks to Niko. Yeah, is there anything else you wanted to highlight from the README, Niko?
Not really. I dropped the link to the repo in the chat as well, so people can check it out themselves. And I really hope that it's comprehensive enough for everybody to get started and even to play around a little bit further with it. So running a database migration, extending the UI maybe. And yeah, of course, I also plug Prisma Studio if you want to just browse the data that you currently have in the database. So yeah. Like, why don't you show us the actual code where Prisma is coming into play now?
Maybe we first even start the demo.
Yeah, let's go.
I think, what was it? Probably start.
Yes.
Yes. So let's open it.
And I love the seeded data, like the seeded nodes, which are in there, especially that one node. I think, like I wrote that node today. It was an excellent node.
Yeah.
Love that energy.
That was nice. Yeah, I also took the seeding script here and adjusted it a bit. I think it got a bit more simple.
Yeah, exactly. It now uses Prisma. It looks a lot cleaner. So
so we just do a delete many to wipe all nodes, and then we just do a promise all to create them in Prisma. And then we do the file system shenanigans. In this example project, the nodes are synced both in the database and the file system. So you can write stuff in the Markdown file. So yeah, so this is the example. You have this list view here. You have a detail view. You can edit something. You can delete something, and you can search. You can search in the title. You can, for example, say thing, and only that one will be shown. So now's the question: how is it actually implemented? And now comes the beauty of the new React Server components. We have a part is rendered in the client, another part in the server. Again, I recommend watching the original video because they really explain like how that works from a React side, but I can now at least give a quick overview here. So what everyone knows are client components. Maybe not this one, but let's say node editor. So for example, the editor. These kind of components that are dynamic, where you actually need to write client code, you still write them in the client. You don't render them in the server, and they're normal React components. Yeah. And in this example, and I guess that will also then be the case later in like Create React App and Next and so on, they have a convention. They say if a file ends with .client.js, then it is a file that the compiler system knows I will distribute this to the client. If I have a .server.js, it will never go to the client. And we also can then in a bit talk a little bit about the difference from this to get server-side props and get static props in Next.js. A few people will be familiar with that. So this is a totally normal client component, nothing special about it. But now we have this node list, and that is what we are seeing here on the left, the node list. And now it gets special because we are finally suddenly able to use Prisma in here. That's weird. How can that be? So what we do here, we are importing from a package called React Prisma. And React Prisma is a very thin wrapper around Prisma client. And what it really does, so in these, the only thing it's basically doing is caching results. So if you, for example, are familiar with the React Hook API, it's very similar. So every single time this component node list is rendered, we don't want to actually go to the database. But if we have the value for that particular query already, we just want to return it. We just want to have it in the nodes here. And so what we're basically doing here is translating promises, normal promise API that you know that you can use with await or .then. We're translating that into some kind of promise thing, like I don't even know how they are called. I think, like some suspend kind of data structure, whatever it's called. It's basically something that fits into this model here, a little bit like a hook. And now we're able to access this. The nodes might not be there. That can happen, if this thing is not yet executed and so on. And this is now built in here into React, that we have support for these kind of suspend data structure. And that's all React Prisma is doing here. I think I can actually show you the code for it. React Prisma index TS. So yeah, we have these records, and then we get the unstable get cache for type and wakeable from React, and that's then React is then able to cache the stuff. So here you see the implementation is fairly simple. We're looping over all the queries that the Prisma client has, and then we are just generating this API. In case you do a mutation, we are failing right now. We say you cannot do that. Please directly import at Prisma/client, and we will also go into that a bit in a bit. You might wonder, how do I do mutations now in such an application? We have that part of this demo. We will get into that in a bit, but I really just wanted to show you how simple our first implementation here is. We are really just doing a JSON stringify on the query, and that's our cache key. So that's basically it. So fairly simple. And so yeah, let's actually see if that this thing is actually connected, that this is working. We could, for example, do a take one, take two, and if we update this, we would just see 2 items. Yeah. So
all right. And you should be getting auto completion in there as well. Is that working for you?
That is working. Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Because I have set up these type definitions with the JS doc comments, and I'm really excited that this works. That you get the auto completion even for slightly more advanced scenarios in plain JavaScript by using these type annotations. So that's really awesome.
Yeah, and just a little note: the types here are still incorrect. It's a promise. It shouldn't be a promise. Should directly be the node. These are then things we will still work on. Again, this is we don't even have yet a running example for TypeScript where we can even test this. So, but it's like already a very good direction. And yeah, here we could just show that. I think that was the prime example where this tweet that exploded. Oh no, you go to jail if you do SQL in a React component. Maybe for this Prisma call, you go a little bit less to jail. I don't know. But still, to be fair, you have full access to the database. And that is also something that we are now thinking about at Prisma. How we can make this more safe. I cannot guarantee anything, but we might have something like a viewer, and then you can have like a user ID maybe. This goes more in the direction of the end framework, and anyway, because you don't want to re-implement your permission logic all over the place. You want to have that in one place and save and be sure, okay, I don't do anything stupid in my React components. But there is more coming in the future. What is interesting now is to see how does this actually work with mutations or API calls. And in this example, the React team decided to do a simple REST API with Express. And so they just implemented these REST routes. So for example, you can say a post to the nodes endpoint. And what you see here is again the good old Prisma and Promise API. So where are we importing Prisma from? Here we are directly importing it from @Prisma/client. We just followed the same convention that the React team did as well in their demo, where they just imported from PG directly here. Whereas in this other file, in this DVB file, they have been importing from React PG. So in this case, we just made it the conservative decision for now to not allow mutations in Prisma client here, because again, we have caching. It doesn't make sense to cache a mutation here. That would just be weird. And for now, we're just restricted here. There was a user in Slack who mentioned he would like to have something like a use mutation API maybe. So we have to see on which API we will land there. But for now, this is the simple solution, and it works. So you can just write your normal API routes, and I think they are just connected in the client components. Let's quickly see how that is set up. If you, for example, have the node editor, yeah, they say delete node, and delete node is just use mutation, and I guess that is a React query or something like that.
An API call basically under the hood.
Yeah, just a API call. Exactly, it's where they do a fetch.
Very nice.
So
thank you for that awesome overview, Tim. Really insightful. I think like one thing you mentioned that might be interesting to talk about is how that actually compares to things that we already have in the ecosystem, like get server-side props and get static props from Next.js. Because these kinds of tools, they allow you to do somewhat similar things, but not exactly the same thing. So maybe you can speak a little bit to how they compare. Like server components with these existing tools.
So with get server-side props and get static props, you don't have the guarantee. This component still might be rendered in the client. And the main point is also here really what is bundled. So Dan also showed in the demo. Again, Dan is watching. If I'm saying anything incorrect, just correct us in the comments. And I think he even wrote something in the comments. We can read that in a bit. I think he mentioned that they had like a huge reduction in bundle size at Facebook already in experiments. So the main point really with this get server-side components, I mean, for me, there were two big takeaways here. One is, why are they so interesting? Why are they so useful? One is the problem of waterfall, or connection waterfalls, or like regress waterfalls. Let's say you have a bunch of nested components, and first you need to do a regress for the parent component. Then the child component can be rendered. That component then needs to do another fetch, fetches more data, and so on. That's slow, and you don't want that. Relay solves that. However, not everyone wants to use Relay. And now the idea is really, if you just move all of these components to the server, yes, you still might have the waterfall situation, but the distance is much smaller, and so it's much faster. That's great. That's one reason. And the other reason is reducing bundle size. In the demo, they showed this example for a date library that was like 30 kilobytes big. And in a React server component, you will never ship that library in that file that you used in that file to render that component. You will never ship that library to the browser. And that is a big difference here. If you have get server-side props, get static props, that means that the Next.js is basically injecting initial props into that component, but that component is still shipped to the client, and that component still can do anything like manipulate the DOM or like use the browser API directly, window dot whatever. So it's really get server-side props and get static props is mostly about how the initial render of that component happens. Get static props means you need to, like statically, when you compile your application, you need to have these props ready, which you don't always have.
At build time,
exactly.
Basically.
Exactly. And get server-side props, you can do that based on the request, so that you could, every single time a request comes in, you can fetch the latest blog post or something like that. So I would say get server-side props behaves quite similar to React server components, although again, there's a note from Dan. Also note get server, maybe you can quickly highlight that note. Also note get server-side props has to be in top-level component, whereas server components lets you do data fetching anywhere in the tree. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Get server-side props only works for pages. You can just use the server components anywhere in your tree. It can be a child component of a client component. That's the beauty here. And again, a client component can be a child of a server component. That's the beauty here. So I think that's like the difference there. Yeah.
Amazing. Thanks for clarifying that. I think that was a point of confusion that a lot of people had, like not really knowing where to draw the lines between these different kinds of tools. And yeah, I'm super excited for that. So React Server Components at the moment are still experimental, but we'll have a very close eye on the development there, and we'll make sure that the React Prisma package is always up to date for everybody who wants to tinker with React Server Components and wants to explore how that actually works, accessing your database inside a React component. So go ahead and check out the demo, go ahead and check out the NPM package, and let us know what you think about it. We're always eager to learn about your feedback here. Anything else that's worth mentioning about server components, or should we maybe start wrapping up by picking up 1 or 2 questions from the chat?
I think that's it so far from my side.
Nice.
Yep.
All right. Then we had a few questions in the chat earlier that I can bring up. So one I wanted to highlight is a question about Prisma Migrate and when it will work together with native types. And in fact, I just checked with our product team today about this particular request, because indeed I'm big, or like the big value of native types is actually going to come only when you can combine it with Prisma Migrate. So at the moment, it's nice that you can already specify these type annotations in your Prisma schema, that you get those when you run introspection. But really, the big value comes when you can also use it the other way around for migrations. And we are actively working on that, and it's likely going to be released fairly soon. We can't promise anything, of course, but it might already be in the next release. If not that, then probably in the release after. So you can expect it within the next 2 to 4 weeks. And yeah, we are also working on the stable release of Prisma Migrate itself. And the more people are trying it, the more people are sharing feedback, the more, or the faster we'll be able to release this. So go ahead, check it out, play around with it, use it, and let us know how it works for you so that we can release it for production as soon as possible. That was one question. There was another question also by Phil, who asked already about the groupBy feature before. Will I be able to dynamically choose the binary target without modifying the Prisma schema? For example, when building for multi-arc with Docker's buildx. Tim, is that a question that you can respond to? Otherwise, I can try to give it a shot.
Yeah. So, I mean, buildx is really new. It's not still experimental, but generally, we have an auto detection for binary targets. And so if you don't provide the binary target in your schema, then we are automatically detecting it and downloading the right binary for you. It could be that you say, I want to build for my local system that is detected, and I also want to build for 5 other systems, maybe, because I need to distribute that. Then you can use a special keyword in there, and that is called native. So that's like a placeholder that still this functionality is happening, that on the system that is being built on, the right binary is being downloaded. And additionally, you can say, but I also want these and those binaries. I think with that, you should get pretty far. If that is not enough, we even have a way to override the binaries that you want to use in runtime. That's also a possibility. There are still a few operating systems that we're not supporting. For example, ARM on Mac, or build targets that we're not supporting, ARM on Mac. There you can have that approach. But I think with these primitives that are available, you should get pretty far.
Sweet. All right. Then there's one last question I think that we can quickly talk about from Angelo Moreira. It's not really a question, it's just a comment about using Prisma together with GraphQL. The annoying thing about Prisma is that I didn't find a way to not have to declare my Prisma models and have GraphQL use those. I actually have to write the models in GraphQL again. And I think that this is actually a fairly common thing that people are running into and that people are wondering about. But like, I want to explain a little bit also why this entire notion of wanting your Prisma models mirror your GraphQL types is a little bit misleading, actually, and might not be what you actually want. So it might feel a little bit counterintuitive at first sight that you have to define your schema twice, that you're once writing your Prisma models, and then especially if you're using an SDL first approach for GraphQL, that you then have to redefine the things that you just defined for your database schema in GraphQL as well. But I think that there is a really good reason to that, and that is that in most real-world scenarios, in fact, you want your database structures, the database tables, to look somewhat different from the data structures that you're exposing through your API. So it's kind of intentional that these two are not the same. And there are still ways how you can actually project your Prisma models into your GraphQL API. For example, if you're using Nexus and the Nexus Prisma plugin, so a code-first approach for your GraphQL schema, then this will be possible without a lot of extra code, and that's where you can reuse your model definitions. I don't think that similar tooling exists yet for the SDL first approach, but what I could imagine is, for example, a plugin for GraphQL code generator that would enable that. But again, with a caveat that in a lot of cases, you actually don't really want to expose your database models one by one through GraphQL, and rather want these two kinds of data structures to diverge and want to have the flexibility to be able to redefine them and adjust them. A typical use case for that is that a user table in the database would typically store a password field, but that password field shouldn't be exposed in the API. So if the GraphQL library that you were using now forces you to expose the entire Prisma model, including that password field via GraphQL, that's not really what you want in that case. So you do want to keep that flexibility in order to be able to kind of diverge between your database layer and your API layer. All right. I hope that explanation made sense. And if nobody else has anything to add, I think
just
we can...
a little thing to add here.
Yeah,
because Lauren also appeared in the chat, and I also have to say a huge shout out to her. Dan mentioned earlier in the chat that it was mostly her demo, so also thanks to Lauren for making that possible. I hope we did not rip your demo apart too much. You can check our fork out. We wrote it somewhere in the comments. Yeah.
I'll drop it again. All right. Yeah. Shout out to Lauren. Shout out to Dan and everybody else who was watching today. And I'll see you, Ryan, in 2 weeks again. And of course, in our internal Prisma Slack. Enjoy the rest of your days.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.